The storm had torn across Boothbay Harbor with a fury Sam Whitaker had not seen in years. It wasn't the kind of storm that simply passed through. It was the kind that arrived with purpose, like it wanted to rip something out of the world and take it with it. Roof shingles clattered across porches, waves slammed the breakwater hard enough to shake windows, and the wind screamed against the coastline like it had bones to pick with every soul living there. Now at dawn, everything was too quiet. Sam stepped out onto his porch boots, unlaced coat hanging open, steam rising from the coffee cup, cupped between cold hands. The air still felt bruised heavy with the aftertaste of chaos. Branches snapped under his boots, debris littered the yard, and far-off gulls circled low and slow, as though even they were unsure the world had settled. He closed his eyes for a moment and let the silence press in. Ever since Ellen died, silence had become something he lived with, but this was different. This wasn't the quiet of an empty house or the loneliness of a long winter. This was the quiet that came after the world had screamed itself raw. He didn't trust it. The sea only looks calm when it's hiding something, he muttered. He wasn't sure if he was talking to himself or to Ellen or to the sea. Sometimes all three felt the same. He pulled on his gloves, tossed the last of his coffee into the gravel, and headed down to the dock. The Mercy. His old lobster boat nudged the wooden pilings like she was impatient to get moving. She'd weathered storms far worse than last night's, but Sam still ran a hand along her rail, checking for new dents, new cracks, anything the storm may have stolen. "You still with me?" he said, patting the side. "Good girl." He tossed aboard his gear, untied the ropes, and pushed off. The engine coughed twice before settling into its familiar hum. Fog clung low to the water, thick enough to blur the edges of the world. Sam guided the boat through it, feeling memory and habit take over where sight failed. Out here, routine mattered. Trying to rebuild after the storm mattered. Keeping your hands busy mattered even when your heart didn't want to follow. The traps would need checking, lines retying, maybe repairs. Work was comfort. Work didn't ask questions. As he moved farther into open water, the fog began to thin in strips, peeling away to reveal scars left by the storm. A shattered buoy bobbed aimlessly, tangled with seaweed. A section of pier floated by like a broken rib. Farther out, an overturned skiff drifted belly up, rocking in small pulses. "Poor bastard," Sam whispered. He'd check it on his way back. Storms didn't always ask permission to take what they wanted. He adjusted course toward St. Matthew's Island, a jagged sliver of rock and stubborn grass that sat 3 miles off the coast. Fishermen had always avoided landing there. Too sharp, too unpredictable, too wrecked by the tides. Which was why something on its shore, something long, pale, and wrong, snagged Sam's attention like a hook to the gut. He slowed the engine, leaned forward, blinked twice. At first it looked like driftwood, maybe the hull of a small boat, but the shape was too clean, too rectangular, too deliberate. It lay wedged between 2 black stones, half out of the water, barnacles clinging to its sides. No, not driftwood. A box. A long one. 6 feet at least. Sam's breath hitched. A coffin. He wasn't a man prone to superstition. He had been raised on the coast, taught that the ocean was merciless but honest. It took, it gave, it destroyed, it fed. But it did not lie. Except now, staring at that thing on the rocks, he felt like it was lying to him, pretending to be just a piece of wreckage when something inside him whispered otherwise. He cut the engine. Silence dropped around him so fast it felt like falling. He reached for the radio. "This is Mercy 17 calling Boothbay Patrol," he said, forcing steadiness into his voice. A crackle answered. "Go ahead, Mercy 17. I've got an object on the north side of St. Matthew's. Appears to be a wooden coffin, possibly washed up after the storm." Another pause. Longer this time. "Copy that, Mercy. Maintain distance. We'll dispatch a team, over." "Understood." He clipped the radio back and didn't move. He couldn't take his eyes off it. Every instinct in him, the ones built from decades of storms, lost nets, drowned men, and strange things pulled from deep water, told him this wasn't something he should get close to, but something older, something quieter, something he couldn't name. Told him he wouldn't be able to walk away. He should wait. But his breath had gone shallow, his heartbeat loud. The stillness around him had changed, no longer empty but expectant. The fog drifted, rising like a curtain, and the box sat there looking back at him. He muttered, "Don't be stupid, Sam." His hand still shook as he reached for the rope holding his small dinghy. He wasn't sure when he stood up, or when he started lowering the dinghy into the water, or when he climbed down into it and pushed off. It felt like he was watching himself from outside his body, rowing toward something that shouldn't exist, something the sea had held on to for God knew how long. The water barely moved, not even a ripple, as if the ocean itself was holding its breath. When the dinghy scraped rock, Sam exhaled shakily and climbed onto the island. Pebbles crunched beneath his boots. The air grew colder. The coffin lay 10 feet ahead, trapped between two ridges of stone like a secret shoved into a hiding place. Up close, it looked even older. Wood dark, swollen from years, maybe centuries underwater. Iron hinges rusted to a brittle orange. Barnacles clustered along its edges like small hands. Sam swallowed hard. "What are you doing here?" he whispered. No answer. Only the low hiss of the tide retreating. He reached out. His fingertips brushed the wood. Cold. Too cold. He withdrew his hand. His heart hammered. Something deep inside told him this was a mistake. But something deeper said he couldn't stop now. In the still air, even his breath sounded loud. Behind him, far off across the water, something growled, the faint thrum of an engine. The patrol boat. Sam's pulse jumped. He knew what he was supposed to do. Step back. Walk away. Wait. But the sea had kept this thing hidden for decades. Maybe longer. And it was here now in front of him for a reason he didn't understand, but could feel in his bones. He leaned closer. And just as his hands closed around the lid, he whispered the words that would follow him into everything that came next. "I just need to know." The hinges screamed in protest as Sam pried them loose, the old driftwood lever groaning beneath the pressure. For a long second, the lid didn't move, like the box itself was refusing to open. The ocean around him held still, too still. Even the wind, so relentless the night before, seemed to have disappeared. Then, with a sudden brittle crack, the edge of the lid split. A puff of dust escaped, fine and bitter, mixing with the salt in the air. Sam recoiled slightly, coughing eyes stinging. But when the air cleared and the silence returned, he leaned forward again, hands shaking. He peeled the lid back just enough to peer inside. Darkness. Then, shimmer. Faint at first, almost invisible in the gray morning light. But as his eyes adjusted, he saw the unmistakable flicker of metal beneath a thin layer of silt. He blinked, unsure if his mind was tricking him, but no, there it was. Gold. Coins scattered like spilled sunlight. A silver cup dulled by time. A brooch. A ring. all tangled in fine cloth that had long since rotted into threads, and nestled between them, half buried, was something small and oval delicate. Sam reached in his fingers, brushing cold metal. A locket. He lifted it carefully. It swung gently on a rusted chain crusted with salt but intact. He wiped it clean against his coat, revealing a carved monogram, EA. He hesitated. Then with a flick of his thumb, he opened it. Inside was a portrait, water-damaged but hauntingly clear. A young woman, barely 20 by the look of her hair, drawn back in soft Victorian curls, her expression calm, eyes full of quiet resolve. Not joy, not sadness, something in between. Sam forgot to breathe. She wasn't just painted, she was present, like she was waiting. "She's looking at me like she knows I opened it," he whispered, the words escaping before he could stop them. He closed the locket and clutched it in his fist. Behind him, the low rumble of a boat engine crept closer. Panic flooded his chest. The patrol. Without thinking, Sam shut the lid, pressed it back into place as best he could, and scrambled to cover the cracks with seaweed. The hinges no longer aligned perfectly, but it looked mostly undisturbed, at least from a distance. He stuffed the locket into the inside pocket of his coat. His heart wouldn't slow. He rowed back fast enough for the oars to slap the water, fast enough for the wind to return like breath returning to a body. By the time he climbed back aboard the Mercy, the patrol boat was visible, a dark silhouette emerging from the fog, slicing toward the island. He wiped his hands on his jeans and forced himself to breathe. Deep, even, controlled. The boat pulled alongside minutes later. Deputy Rick Donnelly was at the helm, squinting through the mist. "Sam," he called out. "You're early." "Was already headed out," Sam lied smoothly. "Spotted that thing, figured it was worth a call." Rick cut the engine and drifted closer. "You touch it," Sam shook his head. "Didn't seem right." Rick nodded approvingly. "Good. Let's take a look." The two men landed back on St. Matthews and approached the coffin-shaped object. Rick crouched beside it, inspecting it carefully. "Jesus," he muttered. "You weren't kidding. This thing's ancient." Sam stayed a few feet back, arms crossed. His eyes never left the locket bulge in his coat. Rick stood. "We'll bring it in. Let the museum folks take a look. Might be something important." "Might be," Sam said quietly. He helped Rick load the box onto the patrol boat, saying little. His hands moved by muscle memory, but his mind was elsewhere, on the woman in the locket, on the gold, on the silence that had pressed in so thick it had felt alive. Back on the mainland, news spread fast. A coffin-shaped chest pulled from the rocks, possibly a relic of a lost shipwreck. Local news showed up, then regional press. Words like discovery mystery and buried treasure floated around town. Sam didn't answer questions. He stayed off the docks, drank his coffee in silence, walked the long back roads instead of heading into town. At night he couldn't sleep. The woman's face waited for him every time he closed his eyes. Sometimes he heard waves crashing in the distance, even when the sea was still. Other nights he heard something stranger. His name, spoken softly, like it came through water. He began waking up at odd hours. The locket, always close by under his pillow, clutched in his hand, its chain tangled around his fingers. After 3 nights like that, he knew he couldn't carry it alone. So on the 4th morning, with the sky barely waking, he stepped into Bennett's Books and History, a small, warm shop tucked between the bait shop and the post office. Dust hung in the air like part of the decor. Shelves leaned with the weight of forgotten stories. A bell chimed overhead as the door creaked shut behind him. Clara Bennett looked up from behind the counter, reading glasses perched on her nose. "Sam Whitaker," she said. "You finally come for a novel. I came for something old," he replied. "And maybe a bit strange." She tilted her head. "Go on." He stepped forward, hand deep in his coat, and pulled out the locket. He placed it carefully on the counter. Her eyes narrowed as she leaned in. "I found this," he said, "in that thing out on St. Matthew's, before the patrol got there." She said nothing, only turned the locket over gently with one finger. Her eyes darted to the monogram. "EA," she read. "You realize this could be 19th century." Sam nodded. "I need to know who she is. I need to know why she feels like she's still waiting." Clara looked at him. "Sam, you don't find a story like this. It finds you." The words hit harder than he expected. She opened a ledger from beneath the desk, scrawled something in it, then disappeared into the back. Sam stood alone in the silence, staring at the locket, trying to explain to himself why he hadn't told Rick, why he hadn't handed it over, why he couldn't. A minute later, Clara returned holding 3 books, all leather-bound, all marked with tabs and paper slips. "Let's find out who Evelyn Ashford was," she said, placing them gently on the counter. His stomach dropped. He hadn't told her the name. He never said Evelyn, but somehow she already knew. The wind outside Sam's window had gone still again. That strange kind of still that didn't bring peace, only questions. Moonlight streamed through the curtain, painting long streaks across the wooden floor. He lay in bed flat on his back, one hand resting on the medallion that now lived beneath his pillow. Sleep didn't come. Every time he closed his eyes, she was there. Not just the painting in the locket, but something more. A figure on the shore. Hair swept back by wind-white dress clinging to her like mist. Her face wasn't frightening, but it wasn't welcoming either. It was patient, knowing, watching. He sat up and reached for the medallion, his fingers closing around it like instinct. The chain slid between his fingers, cold and delicate. He turned it over again and again, as if somehow it would answer him if he just held it the right way. "She's looking at me like she knows I opened it," he muttered, his voice hoarse from silence. He stood, pulled on his coat, and stepped out onto the porch barefoot. The wood was cold underfoot, and the sea stretched out in front of him like a black void. Quiet, restless, waiting. Down below, the Mercy rocked gently at its mooring. Sam stared at her, then at the horizon beyond. The same horizon that had given him this mystery. He didn't feel like a man who had found treasure. He felt like a man who had stepped into someone else's unfinished story. And now that story wouldn't let him go. The next morning, he returned to Bennett's Books and History. Clara was already up, flipping through an old manifest log, her sleeves rolled up and a coffee steaming beside her. She looked up as the bell above the door jingled. "Didn't sleep again, did you?" Sam shook his head and pulled out the stool beside her desk. "She's not just in the locket, Clara. I keep seeing her, hearing her, and not in the dream kind of way. It's like she's here." Clara didn't flinch. Some people would say that's grief. Others would say it's guilt. "I didn't do anything wrong." "Didn't you?" she asked softly, not accusing, just observing. "You opened something that wasn't yours. You took a piece of it. You lied to the patrol." Sam's lips tightened. "You think I should give it back?" "I think it's not about the medallion, Sam. I think it's about what it means. To you. To her." maybe even to the sea. He looked down. So what now? Clara reached under the counter and slid a yellowed folder toward him. Now we find out why she found you. Inside were documents, newspaper clippings, shipping logs, and one grainy photograph. A ship, dark and proud, docked at a Boston harbor. The Celestine, 1854, registered to Captain Thomas Ashford. The clipping beside it detailed the vessel's disappearance during a transatlantic voyage from Boston to Liverpool. 8 passengers missing. 1 confirmed dead. A daughter traveling with her father. Evelyn Ashford. She was 22, Clara said. According to this, her mother had died just before the voyage. They were taking her body home to England. Sam frowned. Then what's the gold for the silver? That wasn't a coffin, it was a tomb and a treasure chest in one. Clara nodded slowly. A family like the Ashfords wouldn't have buried a daughter without honor. Maybe the father intended her resting place to carry everything valuable to the family. Not just wealth. Meaning. Memory. Sam leaned back. The weight in his chest tightened again. He felt it every time the word resting place came up, because he had disturbed it. I don't think it was supposed to come back, he said. The sea kept her hidden for a reason. Or maybe it kept her safe. Until now. He looked up at her. You think this is fate? Clara smiled faintly. I think the ocean doesn't give up what it takes, unless it's time someone remembered. Sam left the bookstore in silence, the medallion heavy in his pocket. That evening he sat on the porch as the sun sank low, casting fire across the water. He didn't move for a long time. Didn't speak. Just listened. And just before the last light disappeared, he heard it again. His name. Soft like breath across skin. Whispered on wind that had no business carrying voices. He stood quickly, heart pounding. There was no one around. Only the sea. The gulls had gone quiet again. The docks creaked in the distance, empty. He stared out toward St. Matthew's Island, where the box had first appeared. The shape of it still haunted his memory, the weight of centuries tucked into that forgotten shore. He pulled the medallion from his pocket and held it in the light. Evelyn's painted face looked back at him, no less calm, no less knowing. She wasn't asking for anything. She was just waiting. Back inside, Sam poured himself a drink he didn't want and sat down at the kitchen table. The old radio beside the sink crackled with static from the weather station. A squall offshore. Mild winds. Nothing to worry about. But his mind was somewhere else entirely. In the silence, he began to speak aloud. I don't know what you want from me, he said, quietly, eyes on the locket. But I can't stop thinking about you. I can't stop feeling like you're still here. The house answered with creaks and wind. I think you need to go home, he whispered. And I think you need someone to take you there. He didn't sleep that night. He wrote instead. A journal pulled from the drawer where Ellen used to keep shopping lists. Page after page. His thoughts. His dreams. The image of the young woman. The gold. The silence that spoke louder than sound. By sunrise, he had made up his mind. He needed to return to the place it all began. Not to open the box, not to steal from it, but to listen to whatever the sea hadn't finished saying. Clara Bennett didn't blink as she said it. Her voice was soft, but there was steel underneath. She wasn't trying to scare Sam Whitaker, she was simply telling the truth. He could feel it settle into the room like fog slipping through the seams of an old window. They sat in the back corner of Bennett's Books and History, surrounded by towers of maritime journals, salt-stained registries, and enough brittle newspaper clippings to wallpaper the town hall. Clara had brought out the heavy stuff today, the kind of research that smelled like ghosts and ink. Sam hadn't spoken since she said Evelyn's name out loud. "I didn't tell you her name," he said finally, his voice barely above a whisper. "No," Clara replied. "But you were never going to leave here without knowing it." He stared at the photograph again. It had been reprinted from a daguerreotype, grainy and worn, but the shape of Evelyn's face was unmistakable. The same calm expression as the locket. Same eyes, same eerie stillness. Clara flipped through a bound collection of letters written by a Boston family, whose last known correspondence placed them aboard the Celestine. The Ashfords. Wealthy, educated, steeped in social expectations and tragedy. The mother, Margaret Ashford, had died at sea on a return voyage from London. The father, Captain Thomas Ashford, had chartered a private ship to carry her remains back to England for burial. Evelyn had insisted on going with him. "I think she was the heart of that family," Clara said, pointing to a passage. "Look here. This letter from her cousin says, 'Evelyn does not let grief harden her, only deepen her. She walks with sadness as if it were a part of her shadow, but never lets it lead her.' That doesn't sound like a fragile girl. It sounds like someone who carried more than her share." Sam rubbed his face, worn and quiet. "They never made it," he murmured. "The storm off the coast. The Celestine disappeared just like that. Bodies lost. Records scattered." Clara nodded. "Until the storm last week brought a piece of it back." Sam stood and walked to the window. Outside, Boothbay Harbor bustled in its usual quiet rhythm. Locals hauling lobster traps, tourists wandering past gift shops. But to him, everything felt different now. He had stepped outside their world the moment he opened that box. Why now, he asked. Why would the sea hold on to her for that long, only to bring her here? Clara folded her hands. Maybe it wasn't just her it brought back. Sam turned to her. "What do you mean? You said it yourself. You see her, hear her. She's not asking for revenge. She's not haunting you, Sam. She's guiding." He let the silence linger before replying. "I just wanted to know who she was," he said. "But now I feel like I've been brought into something much bigger than her. Than me." Clara stood and walked to a small display case near the back wall. Inside it was a brass sextant, a broken compass, and an old ship's bell. She opened the case, pulled out the bell, and handed it to him. "This belonged to a sailor who drowned in 42, she said. His wife brought it here after the funeral. Said the sea gave back his body, but not his voice. Every year on the anniversary of his death, she rang it once. Said it helped her let go." Sam held the bell in his hands. It was cold and heavy. Just like the locket. Just like everything about this story. "You think I need to let Evelyn go?" he asked. Clara shook her head. "I think she's not asking to be let go. I think she wants to be heard." "That's different." He exhaled slowly. His thumb brushed the locket in his coat pocket. The familiar smoothness of its surface, calming and electric at once. "I need to go back to St. Matthew's," he said. "Not to open anything. Just to sit. To listen. I think that's exactly what you should do." She handed him a leather-bound book on the way out. Ashford Lineage 1812 to 1860. Sam took it like he was accepting a compass. The fog rolled in thicker that evening, coiling through the harbor, like it had unfinished business. Sam walked the length of the dock boots, echoing softly against the wood. At the end, the Mercy swayed slightly in her slip, groaning at the ropes like she knew what he was thinking. He didn't untie her. Not yet. Instead, he stood at the end of the dock with the medallion in one hand and the Ashford book in the other. He read by lamplight until the cold chased him home. That night, the dreams came sharper, not just flashes, full scenes. Evelyn standing at the bow of the ship, her dress soaked from storm water, her father shouting commands behind her, waves crashing, wood splitting. A sudden silence before impact, and her face calm even then. He woke drenched in sweat. He stumbled to the kitchen and poured a glass of water, his hands trembling. He opened the journal he'd started the night before and wrote, "She doesn't want to be remembered as treasure. She wants to be remembered as real." He stared at the words for a long time. Then beneath them, he added, "I think I was meant to find her." But what does she want me to do with that? By morning, he had his answer. He returned to Clara's shop just after sunrise. She was already up cleaning the display case. "I need to know more," he said. "About the ship, the burial customs, everything. If I'm going to carry this, I have to carry it the right way." Clara gave him a tired but knowing smile. "Then let's get to work." Together, they dove into archives. Clara contacted a maritime historian in Portland. Sam spoke to a retired shipwright about coffin construction in the 1800s. Every clue, every answer, pulled him deeper. And the deeper he went, the less it felt like research and more like something spiritual. One afternoon, Clara handed him a thin envelope. Inside was a water-stained letter written in a woman's hand. "To my daughter Evelyn, should this voyage fail, may this locket hold my final words." Sam didn't read further, not yet. His hands trembled again. He was getting close, and he could feel it, something stood beyond the edge of understanding, waiting to be named, waiting to be finished. He looked out toward the harbor, the lighthouse in the distance, no longer just a beacon, but a promise. He didn't know how yet, but he was going to give Evelyn back her voice. And maybe, just maybe, in doing so, he'd reclaim a piece of his own. The words echoed in his head as Sam Whitaker sat alone on the rocky shore just east of Boothbay Harbor, the book of the Ashford family lineage resting beside him on a flat boulder, and the medallion, her medallion, cradled in his hand. The morning sun struggled to break through the clouds overhead, casting the sea in a muted silvery gray. Gulls circled far above but didn't cry out. Even nature seemed to be listening. He hadn't planned to come back to this spot. Not yet. But something about the letter Clara gave him, a mother's final words to a daughter lost to the sea, had pushed him forward. He hadn't read it in full. Couldn't. Not until he was ready. But it was tucked in his coat now, resting close to his heart like a live current. The rocks around him were slick from last night's tide, and the scent of salt and rot clung to everything. A fisherman might have called it a normal morning, but Sam could feel it. This wasn't normal. Nothing had been since the storm. Not the air, not the sea, not him. He ran his thumb over the locket's engraved initials again. E.A. Evelyn Ashford. The name was no longer a mystery. It was a presence. "She's not letting go," he said aloud, and he wasn't sure he wanted her to. In the distance, the faint hum of a boat motor broke the silence. Sam turned his head slightly, but he didn't move. Let it be Rick or one of the harbor patrol guys. Let them pass. He wasn't doing anything illegal, just sitting with something he hadn't earned. He wasn't the kind of man to believe in fate. But this didn't feel like coincidence anymore. It felt like the ocean had chosen him. Clara had said it best, "You don't find a story like this. It finds you." And it was finding him everywhere now. People in town were starting to talk. Not just about the box or the artifacts being analyzed by the historical department in Portland. No, they were talking about him. The quiet widower. The man who'd pulled something ancient out of the waves and hadn't said much about it since. Some were kind, called him lucky. Others whispered about greed or ghosts or worse. He hadn't spoken to Rick Donnelly since the day the patrol retrieved the chest. He hadn't returned any of the historian's calls, hadn't answered the emails from journalists asking for interviews. The only person he trusted in all this was Clara, and even with her, he was still unraveling the edges of what this meant. He picked up the Ashford book and flipped through its pages until he landed on a sketch of the Celestine. Proud, sturdy. A private ship meant for a family of wealth and heartbreak. The caption underneath listed the year of construction, 1851. The ship had vanished barely 3 years later. Everything about it was supposed to be lost. He looked back out to sea. That's when he felt it. Not a sound, not a breeze, a pull. Somewhere between instinct and memory. A magnetic tug behind the ribs. Not fear, not longing, just calling. He stood slowly, his knees stiff from sitting too long, and walked down the incline toward the edge of the water. The tide was retreating, revealing glistening stretches of rock and seaweed. He knelt, ignoring the cold, and dipped the locket into the salt water. The metal shimmered faintly as it touched the sea. There was no lightning, no vision, no voice. But something shifted inside him, something subtle and permanent, like a thread being tied. She was never supposed to be forgotten, he whispered. Back at his house, the restlessness followed him in like a second shadow. He brewed coffee and sat by the small fire he'd built out of habit. It crackled and popped a soundtrack to the thoughts racing through his head. He opened the letter from Evelyn's mother. My dearest Evelyn, if you are reading this, it means something in this world has gone wrong, or right. I do not pretend to understand the ocean's will, only that I leave you with all that I have, my words, my hope, and this locket which carries not gold but memory, and memory I have learned is the only thing that can survive the sea. Sam set the letter down and stared at the flames. Memory. That was the key. This wasn't about relics or discovery or fame. It was about memory being returned to where it belonged. He reached for his journal and scribbled a single sentence. The sea didn't bring her back to be studied. It brought her back to be seen. That afternoon, he wandered the town for the first time in days. People nodded. Some avoided eye contact. One local fisherman clapped him on the back and muttered something about treasure and luck. Sam smiled politely, but didn't stop. He ended up at the far end of the harbor, where an old decommissioned lighthouse sat boarded up and crumbling at the edge of the rocks. It had been closed for decades, too expensive to maintain, too far gone to be worth repair. But as he stared at it, he didn't see ruin. He saw potential. He saw purpose. The name came to him before he realized he'd even spoken it aloud. Ashford Haven. His voice echoed softly inside the crumbling tower. A place not just to remember Evelyn, but everyone the sea had taken. A place for stories, for memory. The wind picked up, curling around the stone like it approved. The next morning, he made a call to a man he hadn't spoken to in years, Tom Wallace, a builder with a reputation for turning rot into beauty. When Tom answered, Sam didn't explain everything. He just said, I'm buying the lighthouse. I want to bring it back. You sure about that? Tom asked. I've never been more sure of anything. He hung up and stared at the sky. He had no blueprint, no plan. Only a story that had found him, and now he was going to finish it. One stone, one nail, one beam at a time. Later that night, as he sat by the fire, the locket resting in the center of the table, he felt something he hadn't felt in years. Not peace, but purpose. The house creaked softly, and in the far corner of the room, the shadows shifted as if someone had just stepped out of them. He didn't look away. "Don't worry," he said quietly. "I'm not leaving you behind." He picked up the locket and pressed it to his chest. "I'm taking you home." The words came to Sam Whitaker while standing in the hollow heart of the abandoned lighthouse, his boots crunching on broken tile, the salt-bitten wind pushing through cracks in the boarded windows. Dust motes swirled in the light, slanting through a hole in the roof. The place smelled like mildew and rust, like memory left too long in the dark. But he didn't flinch. He saw more than the ruin. He saw possibility. His breath fogged in the cold air as he stepped farther into the space. Iron stairs curved up along the wall, the railing hanging loose in places corroded. Half the windows were boarded. The rest were cracked or missing entirely. Empty beer bottles and graffiti hinted at years of being forgotten, claimed by time and teenagers. But none of that mattered. He wasn't here to see what had become of the place. He was here to see what it could become. Ashford Haven, he whispered, as if the lighthouse needed to hear its new name spoken aloud to accept it. The story had come back from the sea. Now it needed somewhere to rest. It had taken 3 days to negotiate the purchase from the town council. Most of them were surprised anyone wanted the place. One asked if Sam had gone a little storm crazy, and another half joked that it might be haunted, but no one stopped him. He didn't offer many details, just said he had plans, personal ones. And now he stood in the silence of the lantern room, staring out the fractured glass toward the endless stretch of water that had delivered Evelyn Ashford back to shore. He took the medallion from around his neck and placed it gently on the ledge where the light used to be. "I don't know what this place was to you," he said softly, "but it's going to mean something now. I promise." Over the next few days, Boothbay's quiet routine gave way to curious stares and whispers. Sam, once seen only as a reclusive widower with a quiet boat and a long stare, was suddenly a man with a mission. He brought in supplies, talked to builders, met with an architect out of Portland. Everyone wanted to know what the hell he was doing with the lighthouse. And everyone had theories. Some thought it would become a museum. Others assumed he was starting a business, maybe a B&B for rich history lovers. A few of the older men muttered that he was chasing ghosts. But only Clara knew the truth. She visited on the 4th day, bringing a thermos of coffee and an old oil painting of the lighthouse from the 1920s. It showed the tower standing proud light, cutting through thick fog, a fishing vessel just barely visible below. "It belonged to my grandfather," she said. "He always believed places had memories, that if you could restore them, you could bring back what mattered." Sam ran a finger over the cracked frame. "What if I'm not restoring the building?" he asked. "What if I'm restoring a promise?" She studied him for a moment. "Then you're doing the right thing." The right thing wasn't easy. Every day was a battle with rot and rust, with wind that tore at scaffolding and sea air that crept into everything. Sam worked beside the crew, shoulder to shoulder with men half his age. He sanded beams, replaced cracked panes, rebuilt stairs that had been broken for decades. He didn't ask for praise or attention. He only asked that things be done right, that every nail, every board be placed with care. As they worked, he kept the medallion with him, always within reach, sometimes in his coat, sometimes around his neck, sometimes in his palm as he stood at the top of the tower, staring out to the east where the Celestine had gone down. Word finally reached the media again. A reporter from Boston came sniffing around, then a national outlet. They wanted interviews, photographs, human interest stories. Fisherman Turns Ghost Story into Lighthouse Restoration had a ring to it. But Sam refused them all. He didn't want this to become spectacle. This wasn't about fame, or legacy, or even history. It was about her, about memory, belonging, return. Still, attention was hard to avoid. Rick Donnelly stopped by one afternoon leaning against the tailgate of his truck as he watched the crew hoist new timbers into place. "You planning on telling me what this is really about?" he asked. Sam didn't stop hammering. Rick sighed. "I know about the medallion, Sam. You kept it. I get it. You don't trust the museum to tell her story right." Sam looked up, wiped sweat from his brow. "It's not about trust. It's about meaning." Rick folded his arms. "You could have had peace. Instead, you chose this." "I didn't choose it," Sam said. "It chose me." Rick studied him for a long second, then gave a slow nod. "Well, if this is how she gets remembered, you picked a hell of a way to do it." The weeks bled into each other. Rain, cold, spring beginning to threaten through the cracks in winter. The lighthouse began to take shape again, clean walls, reinforced beams, a new lens ordered from a company overseas. The lantern room glistened with new glass and restored copper. And in the heart of the tower, Sam installed a wooden display shelf. Upon it sat a glass case, and inside the case Evelyn's medallion. He had wrestled with the decision, whether to give it back to the museum, to keep it at home, or to return it to the sea. But in the end, this felt right. This was her haven now, her place, her home. And every visitor who climbed the spiral staircase would see her face just as he had. Not to gawk at gold or marvel at mystery, but to remember a life lost and returned. At night, Sam sometimes stayed late, sitting alone in the lantern room as the new light cast slow circles across the water. The sea was different now, still wild, still unforgiving, but no longer empty. One night as he was locking up, he heard a voice behind him. Gentle, feminine, familiar. "Thank you." He turned quickly, no one there. But he smiled all the same. Whether it had come from the wind, the sea, or his own soul, he accepted it. This wasn't closure. It wasn't the end. It was rest. For her. And finally, for him. The fog rolled in thicker than usual that morning, swallowing the coastline and muting the sea's voice into a steady hush. Sam Whitaker stood in the lantern room of the newly restored lighthouse, staring into the nothingness beyond the glass, the sea now hidden from view. He could barely see the rocks below, and the boats bobbing in the harbor had all vanished into the mist. He held the journal in his hands, the one he'd been filling since the storm, since he found her. The pages now carried maps, memories, names, sketches, and questions. But one sentence stood out, circled 3 times in pencil. "Not everything the sea returns is ready to rest." That sentence had come to him in a dream the night before, a vivid, heavy dream. Evelyn standing at the water's edge, her white dress soaked at the hem, face pale but urgent. Her mouth was open like she wanted to speak, but no words came. Only wind, only silence. Then he woke with his heart racing, drenched in sweat, and the distinct feeling that something was missing. Now, as the new beacon turned above him, casting its light across a fog-drenched sea, Sam felt it again, that pull, that tension. Like a thread was still attached to something beneath the surface, something that hadn't risen with the box or the medallion. Evelyn wasn't finished, and neither was he. He turned when he heard footsteps on the spiral stairs. Clara emerged windblown holding a file folder and wearing that half-worried, half-curious look she got when the past started knocking harder than usual. "You weren't at the shop this morning," she said. "Figured you'd be up here." Sam raised a brow. "Was it that obvious? You've been staring at the sea like it owes you an answer." He nodded toward the fog. "Feels like it's hiding something again." Clara set the folder on the ledge. "Maybe it is." He opened it slowly. Inside were copies of maritime investigation notes from 1854, salvage logs, weather reports, and most importantly, testimony from a surviving sailor who claimed to have seen the Celestine go down. But something new was tucked into the stack. A personal letter. Folded, fragile, and barely legible. "Where did you get this?" Sam asked. "An estate sale. A collector who kept it hidden for decades. No one realized what it was until I started digging." He lifted the letter with care. "Thomas, if we are lost, know it was not the sea that took us, but what we carried. There are things aboard that should never have left England. I feared Evelyn would sense it. She always does. M." M. Sam asked aloud. "Margaret Ashford," Clara said. "Evelyn's mother. But she was already dead when they set sail." Clara hesitated. "Maybe not. Not when this letter was written." Sam's eyes snapped up. "You think the mother was alive aboard the Celestine?" "I think the story we've been told might be wrong, or at least incomplete." A chill moved down his spine. If Margaret Ashford was alive on that voyage, then what else had been hidden and what exactly had Evelyn been trying to tell him? Clara pulled another document from the folder, a hand-drawn cargo manifest. At the bottom, barely legible, 2 crates marked Private Lord Everhart. Sam frowned. "Who the hell is Everhart?" Clara looked uncomfortable. A name that shows up in older occult archives. He was known in certain British circles for collecting unsettling artifacts. There were rumors of spiritualism, rituals, things he was trying to preserve or harness. Sam slammed the folder shut. So that wasn't just a family burial. It was a cover. Clara nodded. It's possible that the Celestine wasn't just carrying Evelyn and her mother's remains. It was transporting something dangerous. And Evelyn knew. She always knew, Clara whispered. The silence thickened in the room. Sam walked to the glass case where Evelyn's locket sat beneath soft light. He stared at it for a long moment. What if the locket wasn't just a memory? What if it's a key to what he turned to Clara? To whatever's still down there? Outside, the fog pressed harder against the windows. The lighthouse groaned. And somewhere beneath that, deep and far off, came the low, mournful hum of something rising. Something that did not want to be remembered. Sam didn't speak the thought aloud, but he felt it in his gut. Not everything the sea gave back was meant to be found. Later that night, he returned home and pulled out every map, every log, every clue he'd collected. He marked the last known coordinates of the Celestine. It wasn't far from the edge of St. Matthew's Island, a place few dared to dive, a place known for deep currents and strange wrecks. He ran a finger across the circle on the map. "She's still down there," he whispered. "Not just Evelyn, not just the ship, but whatever Lord Everhart had been hiding." He didn't know what he would find, but he knew he had to go. Clara had warned him that the ocean was patient, but not forgiving, that its memory was long, but its anger longer, and still he couldn't turn away. He made 2 phone calls, one to Griff, a retired Navy diver who owed Sam a favor and had more experience with wreckage than anyone in Maine. The other to Nina Walsh, a marine tech specialist who'd once been fired from a university lab for refusing to hand over sonar footage of something she found off Nova Scotia. He gave them the coordinates, told them there'd be no press, no treasure, just history, secrets, maybe even answers. They both said yes. By morning, the team would be in motion. He'd finally be going down. But tonight, as the fog wrapped around the coast like a ghost of its own, Sam stayed awake. And as he stared out the window, medallion in hand, Evelyn's words, ones she had never spoken, but that he now believed he could almost hear echoed inside him. If you want to bring me home, you have to understand why I couldn't leave. And that meant going into the dark, not to discover, but to remember. The dive boat rocked steadily in the swells just off the jagged cliffs of St. Matthew's Island. Fog clung to the sea like it had something to hide, dense and cold, curling around the equipment crates, and dive tanks like breath from some unseen mouth. Sam Whitaker stood at the edge of the deck, already suited up, the dive regulator slung over his shoulder, and the weight of too many unanswered questions pressing down on his chest. He stared down at the water, which churned with an unnatural stillness. Below him, just 70 feet beneath the surface, were the final coordinates marked in a red circle on a map he now knew by heart. This wasn't just a wreck site. It was the last grave of the Celestine. And maybe more than that. Griff tightened the last strap on his wetsuit, glancing over at Sam with the casual weariness of someone who'd seen too much of the ocean and trusted none of it. "You sure you're up for this?" Whitaker Griff asked, testing his comm unit. Not every day a fisherman decides to chase 170-year-old ghost ships. Sam looked at him, calm but certain. "I'm not chasing ghosts. I'm finishing something that never got the chance to end." From the other side of the deck, Nina Walsh adjusted her dive computer and checked the sonar readout strapped to her wrist. Her sharp green eyes flicked from the screen to the sea. "We've got something big down there," she said. "L-shaped profile. Could be hull plating. Maybe even intact structure. But there's something else." She hesitated. "There's a metal signature I can't identify. Not ship grade." Sam felt the medallion inside the chest pocket of his dry suit. He'd taken it with him, sealed in a watertight pouch. He didn't know why, only that it belonged down there as much as Evelyn did. Clara's warning echoed in his mind. If something was never meant to surface, maybe we should respect that. But it was too late for respect. The sea had already given part of her back, and it hadn't done that by accident. With one final nod, Sam stepped to the edge of the dive platform. "Let's go." The splash swallowed his body, and in an instant, the world went quiet. Underwater, everything changed. The silence was complete, broken only by the rhythmic hiss of his breathing and the muffled hum of Nina and Griff descending behind him. The water here was darker than he expected, tinged with a greenish hue, thick with sediment, and unnaturally cold. Light from the surface barely penetrated more than 20 feet. Below that, it was a world all its own. They followed the tether line down to the wreck site, depth gauges clicking past 50 feet, then 60. At 72 feet, the first shape emerged, a splintered mast, rotting but upright, spearing upward like a ghost hand reaching for the sky it hadn't seen in centuries. Then the hull came into view. Massive, broken, open at the keel, but unmistakably a ship, the Celestine. Sam felt his stomach turn, not from nerves, but from awe. This wasn't just a wreck, it was a tomb sealed in salt and time. Griff signaled toward a breach in the starboard side where collapsed planks and seaweed framed a narrow entry. Sam nodded and followed him in. Their lights cut through the darkness, illuminating a narrow passageway inside what must have been the cargo hold. Bones of crates floated in silt. A silver spoon glinted in the muck. A woman's shoe leather eaten away rested gently against a shattered beam. Then they found it. The box. It sat wedged between a wall of collapsed beams, partially split open. Inside, through layers of silt and time, lay the remains of something wrapped in faded cloth. Not human. Not exactly. Sam's hand trembled as he brushed the silt away. Beneath the cloth was a small statue, ivory grotesque, with a face that looked half human, half something else entirely. Its eyes were hollow sockets, but they seemed to follow his movements. He recoiled instinctively. Nina hovered closer, her light catching the faint etching at its base. She tapped her comms. "This doesn't belong on a passenger ship," she said. "That's ritual carving. I've seen drawings like it in ancient texts, Mesopotamian, some Phoenician. But this is newer. 19th century fabrication." Sam didn't respond. He couldn't. The longer he looked at the thing, the more his head throbbed. A low vibration pulsed through the wreck. Griff froze. Did you feel that Sam's eyes darted around? The water was still, but the hull groaned. Another pulse. This one louder. Sudden movement, something darted past Sam's peripheral vision. He spun, shining his light, but there was nothing. Nothing visible. Nina's voice crackled through the comms, clipped and panicked. "I'm getting interference on the sonar, some kind of resonance." And then it hit. A sound deep not from their ears, but their bones. A groan from the ocean floor itself. As if the weight of everything lost, everything buried, had just shifted. Sam grabbed the medallion from his pouch, pulling it out with a shaking hand. And for one brief second, as his light passed over the golden surface, he saw Evelyn. Not a vision, not a hallucination, just her face, mouth moving, speaking without words, behind her shadow. Then everything went black. He came to on the surface. Someone was dragging him onto the boat deck, voices shouting. The sky was spinning. He was coughing water, gasping. "Sam. Sam, you're okay. Just breathe." "Clara." He blinked. Clara was there, kneeling over him, hair-soaked tears mixing with seawater. Griff hovered behind her, pale and shaking. Nina sat with her back to the cabin wall, staring into nothing. What happened?" Sam choked. "You passed out," Griff said. "Your tank cracked. Regulator blew. You were down too long, we almost lost you." But Sam wasn't listening. He turned his head slowly toward the medallion lying beside him. Still intact. Still glowing faintly with seawater. And etched into the back, something new. A symbol that hadn't been there before. Ancient. Unmistakable. Like the one on the statue. Sam whispered the words that had been burning in his mind since he saw her. She wasn't just warning me. She was protecting me. And whatever they had just awakened down there, it wasn't done. It was the 4th day since the dive. Sam Whitaker hadn't stepped foot near the water since. His body had mostly recovered bruised lungs, a cracked rib, a few burns from the damaged regulator. But it wasn't the physical injuries that had him pacing the floor of the old lighthouse in the dead of night. It was the silence. The kind that echoed louder than any sound. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw Evelyn's face again, not haunting, not fearful, but desperate. She had tried to speak. She had wanted to speak. And the only thing he heard now was that strange sound from the deep, that underwater groan that felt less like tectonic movement and more like memory shifting under pressure. The statue, that grotesque ivory figure, still haunted his thoughts. Nina had taken high-resolution images of it before the wreck collapsed in on itself. Whatever had happened down there, something had shifted physically and otherwise. The wreck was unstable now, unreachable. Whatever was down there, it was staying there. Sam leaned on the balcony railing and looked out toward the black water. The lighthouse beacon turned behind him, in slow, steady arcs, its light slicing through the fog like a watchful eye. Boothbay Harbor slept soundly behind him, unaware of the storm that had been stirred beneath their shores. The medallion, now etched with that impossible symbol, hung cold against his chest. He hadn't shown it to Clara yet, but he had shown her the sketch of the statue. Her face had gone pale. "I've seen that before," she whispered, almost afraid of the memory. "There's a book in the restricted archives. It was sealed after a fire in 1957. My grandfather told me about it." "What kind of book?" Sam asked. "Not the kind meant for display." That's how they ended up inside the old Boothbay Historical Annex 2 hours before sunrise, Clara picking the lock to the lower archives like she'd done it before. Sam followed with a flashlight, limping slightly, the taste of salt still lingering in the back of his throat. The archive basement smelled of old paper mold and dust. Wooden shelves sagged under the weight of centuries. They moved in silence until Clara stopped at a locked metal cabinet. "This is it." Inside was a single book wrapped in oilskin and marked with a brass tag, "Property of Jonathan Everhart, 1851. Everhart." The name from the cargo manifest, the man Margaret Ashford had warned about. The financier, the collector, the one who had sent the Celestine into the sea, carrying more than just grief. Clara opened the book gently. Its pages were filled with dense handwriting symbols, sketches of relics, and a recurring phrase written in Latin, "Memoria tenebris non perit. Solum dormit." Memory does not perish in darkness. It only sleeps. They sat in silence, turning page after page. Ritual instructions, diagrams of ivory statues, mentions of artifacts believed to contain the weight of human grief. One passage stood out, a direct mention of Evelyn's name. "The girl is sensitive. She hears it, sees it. The others think her melancholy is grief, but it is more. The artifact responds to her. Ashford does not understand. He thinks burying it with his wife will silence it. But the girl will carry its echo. That is her curse." Clara's breath caught. "She was the vessel," she said softly. Sam stared at the page. She wasn't just near it. She contained it. The medallion, the visions, the dreams, the statue reacting to him. It wasn't about Evelyn haunting the world. It was about her shielding it. Sam stood, suddenly pacing. The sea didn't take her. She took it. That thing. She kept it from spreading. She sacrificed herself, Clara said, eyes glassy. And the ocean accepted her. Sam clenched his fists. And then I pulled her out. He'd thought he was honoring her, giving her peace, telling her story. But he had undone a barrier she had willingly become. Now something stirred. Sam opened his journal again, flipped to the back, started writing. Evelyn Ashford was not a ghost. She was a wall, a seal. And I broke it. He looked to Clara. "We need to put it back." She hesitated. Back where the artifact, the story, her name, all of it. It doesn't belong in the world as we understand it. It belongs in silence. Clara closed the Everhart book gently. And how do we do that without becoming what she became? Sam walked to the window, staring out at the sea. The fog had lifted slightly. The waves glimmered with moonlight. "She didn't ask me to save her," he said. "She asked me to understand." He took the medallion from his neck and held it up. She's not angry. She's tired. This isn't about banishing anything. It's about finishing what she started. They returned to the lighthouse before dawn. The Everhart book wrapped and sealed again, placed deep inside the foundation of the tower encased in concrete. Sam placed the medallion back into the glass display where it had first been laid, but this time not as a tribute or a trophy. It was a key, locked in full view. Clara stood beside him. "Will this be enough?" Sam shook his head. "No." She turned to him. "But it will be something," he said. The storm came in that night. No warning, no forecast. Just rain and thunder and a wind that wailed like a grieving mother. The kind of storm old men in Boothbay would talk about for years, saying the sea had moved like it had memory after all. Sam sat in the lantern room through all of it, watching the light sweep over the waves unblinking. And when the storm passed, the sea was calm again. Not quiet, not safe, but still. And Sam knew deep in his bones the story wasn't over. But Evelyn was finally resting. The air inside the Ashford Haven lighthouse carried a reverent hush, the kind you only heard in places where memory outweighed time. The waves outside crashed gently against the rocks, as if the sea itself was listening. Sam Whitaker stood at the front of the lantern room, the medallion resting in its glass case beside him, while the last traces of sunlight stretched long through the newly cleaned windows. It had taken months to get here. The dive, the collapse of the wreck, the sleepless nights, the visions, the quiet storm that brewed in his soul after learning what Evelyn Ashford had truly carried. And now finally, this, the telling. A small crowd filled the room. Not hundreds, not even dozens. Just those who mattered. Boothbay locals, a few journalists, some from the Historical Society. Nina. Griff. Clara front row, her eyes as sharp and soft as ever. No fanfare, no headline-grabbing spectacle. Just truth. Sam took a breath and began. "I didn't come here to talk about the sea," he said. "We've all heard the stories, the storms, the wrecks, the disappearances. But I'm not here for the ocean. I'm here for what the ocean tried to protect." He let the words hang. For 170 years, we told a version of Evelyn Ashford's story that was easy to swallow. A girl lost in tragedy. A shipwreck. A sad, noble end. But that story, that clean version, was never hers. It was ours. What we needed to sleep at night. He turned slightly, gesturing toward the medallion. This belonged to her. It was found on her when the sea gave her back. Most assumed it was sentimental, a keepsake. But it wasn't just that. It was a seal, a symbol, a warning and a promise. A murmur rustled through the room. Sam opened the notebook he'd carried since the storm, the one filled with sketches, notes, historical records, and the eerie carvings he'd copied from Everhart's book, and the statue they'd found beneath the sea. There was a second artifact aboard the Celestine, he continued. A statue. Not ancient in age, but ancient in design. The man who financed the voyage, Jonathan Everhart, believed it could hold or amplify something. Metaphysical. Sorrow. Grief. Pain. Not as emotion, but as energy. He turned a page, revealing a crude but disturbing sketch of the statue. Hollow eyes, curled limbs, a mouth not carved open, but cracked as if screaming from within. This object wasn't supposed to be brought across the ocean. Margaret Ashford, Evelyn's mother, tried to warn the crew. Her final letters made it clear she feared what Everhart was doing. But by then, it was too late. He tapped the sketch. And Evelyn. She didn't just fear it. She felt it. She absorbed it. A beat of silence. Then they didn't bury her truth. They buried their shame. Clara bowed her head. She was the scapegoat, Sam said, his voice tightening. The one who could hold the sorrow without crumbling. And so they let her. They called her fragile, sick, cursed. But she wasn't. She was strong enough to carry what they couldn't. And when the ship began to sink, when it all went wrong, she didn't fight it. She went down with it willingly to keep the world from ever knowing what had been unleashed. His hand found the case again, the medallion glowing faintly under the light. I thought I was saving her, giving her a home. But what I did was undo her sacrifice. I opened the door she gave her life to close. Murmurs turned into silence again. He turned to face the windows. For weeks after we brought her back, I dreamed of her. Not in torment, not in rage, just standing, watching, waiting. I didn't understand then. I thought she wanted rest, but she didn't. She wanted us to understand, not just the facts, the truth, the cost. He looked back to them, and we do now. The applause didn't come quickly. It came gently. One by one, soft claps growing into a round of collective reverence, not for him, but for the story. For her. The unveiling of Evelyn's story wasn't just emotional. It was dangerous. That became clearer the next day. Sam was walking through town when he saw the first flyer posted on the hardware store window, Ashford Haven Haunted or Hoax. Then came the podcast requests. Paranormal vloggers, YouTubers showing up with drones and IR cameras, a national TV show called Twice offering 6 figures to document the lighthouse phenomenon. Sam said no to all of it. This wasn't a horror story. It was a human one. That evening, he returned to the lighthouse alone, locked the door, turned off the light, sat in silence, and waited. He didn't wait for Evelyn. He waited for clarity, for the sea to settle again in his mind. Around midnight, Clara arrived with 2 thermoses of coffee and the old oil painting of the Celestine. She didn't speak at first, just sat beside him, sipping, watching the fog creep in over the harbor. "They won't stop," she finally said. "The world. Once a story like this is out, it feeds on itself. People want drama ghosts, fear, not quiet grief." Sam nodded. "I know." Clara turned to him. "So what are you going to do?" He stood and walked to the medallion case. "I'm going to keep her story safe," he said. "Not locked away, not erased, but told on our terms. Truth, not spectacle." They stared at the case a moment longer. Then Clara stepped beside him. "Then we protect it," she said. "Together." The next week, a new plaque was installed outside the lighthouse Ashford Haven in honor of Evelyn Ashford, a guardian of silence, a keeper of sorrow, a soul who carried more than the world will ever know. And below that, this is not a place of horror. This is a place of memory. Please enter with respect. Tourists still came, but they were given only the story Sam chose to share. The Everhart records remained sealed. The sonar maps were never published. And the statue, if it still existed, would remain where it belonged, buried beneath water history and the weight of one girl's sacrifice. That night, as another storm rolled in over the Atlantic, Sam stood at the top of the lantern tower, rain on his face, wind in his coat, and light circling out into the dark. Not to warn ships, but to remind the sea. He hadn't forgotten. and he never would. Sam stood waist-deep in the tide salt water swirling around his legs, the wind whipping across the shore like it was trying to tear the past away from him. In his hands, he held the last piece of Evelyn Ashford's story, a letter sealed in wax penned by her own hand before the Celestine ever left port. Clara had found it days earlier, hidden in the lining of the Ashford family's old traveling trunk, buried beneath layers of fabric and time. The ink was faded, the paper brittle, but the words remained deliberate, intimate, heavy with intention. If someone is reading this, it means I didn't come back. Not really, and that's all right. What matters isn't where I rest. It's whether you understand why I stayed. Sam closed his eyes, the sound of waves pressing into his bones. The water was cold, not punishing, just honest. He took a breath and let it out slow, then folded the letter back into its waterproof casing and placed it inside a glass vial. He sealed it and wrapped it in linen before letting it go. The tide pulled it from his fingertips. It drifted out slow, steady, until the sea claimed it again. It wasn't about burying it. It was about returning it. Behind him on the bluff, Clara waited silently. She didn't say anything as he climbed back onto the rocks, soaking wet and barefoot, shivering from more than just the wind. She just handed him a towel and a thermos of hot coffee. She said what she needed to say, Clara murmured. Sam nodded. And I heard her. They sat side by side, looking out over the water, the sky above them a bruised lavender. The sea had been oddly calm for weeks now. No storms, no strange calls in the night, no visions. Just stillness, not emptiness. Peace, Mo, but the world around them didn't know what to do with peace. That was the problem. A few days ago, someone had broken into the lighthouse, tried to steal the medallion. Griff caught them in the act, a college student from out of town who thought it was some kind of relic with psychic energy. The kid didn't mean harm. He was just chasing the wrong kind of story. Still, it rattled them all. If one person believed that others would follow. Curiosity could be just as dangerous as fear. And Sam knew now more than ever Evelyn's story didn't need to be discovered anymore. It needed to be protected, which was why he and Clara had spent the last 3 days meeting with the Boothbay Preservation Council. By the end of next week, Ashford Haven would be classified as a private historical refuge, not open to the public, not searchable in online registries, and definitely not available for commercial tourism. That decision hadn't been easy. It meant turning away grant money. It meant stepping out of the spotlight when so many had just begun to pay attention. It meant, for all intents and purposes, disappearing again. But Evelyn had stayed silent for a reason. And Sam would honor that reason not just with words, but with action. Still, not everyone was happy. Nina had left town. She said it was too quiet, but Sam knew the real reason. She'd seen something down in the wreck that changed her, the same thing he'd felt when he touched the statue, when Evelyn's presence had passed through him like a wave of memory and sorrow and light. Griff stayed, but he rarely spoke about the dive anymore. He just showed up on Sam's porch every few days with firewood or tools or groceries. A man of few words and even fewer now. And Sam was trying to write. Not an article. Not a press release. A book. A real one. Not for publication. Not for fame. Just for memory. He wanted Evelyn's story to be told in its fullness. Not with headlines. Not with sensationalism. Just the quiet truth. A story passed down for the sake of reverence, not attention. He titled it Salt and Silence. Clara edited it page by page with red pencil marks and late-night cups of tea. Sometimes she cried when she read certain passages. Other times she laughed at his more poetic turns of phrase. "You're not Hemingway," she teased. "Thank God," he said. In the evenings they worked in the lighthouse. A small private exhibition was taking shape, not for the public, but for those invited. Trusted. People who needed it. Families with questions. Survivors of tragedies who wanted to believe the sea had memory, not just appetite. The centerpiece was Evelyn's medallion. Still sealed in glass. Still warm to the touch. One night as Clara locked the case, she turned to Sam and said, "Do you think we've done enough?" He didn't answer right away. Instead, he walked to the window and looked out at the ocean, calm, endless, reflecting the stars overhead. "Closure isn't silence," he finally said. "It's the decision to speak anyway." And that was what Evelyn had done. She hadn't fought to be remembered. She had waited to be understood. Later that night, Sam returned home alone. He sat at his kitchen table, the last chapter of Salt and Silence in front of him unfinished. His hand hovered over the paper for a long time before he began to write. "They say the sea keeps what it takes. But that's not true. The sea only keeps what we're not ready to hold. And when we are, it gives it back piece by piece, story by story, until we finally know what to do with it." He paused, reread the line, then slowly wrote one more. Evelyn Ashford was never lost. She was just waiting. He signed his name, closed the notebook, blew out the candle, and sat in the silence, not empty, but full, not haunted, but whole. He thought about how much had changed, how much still would. He didn't know if the sea would ever speak again. But if it did, he'd be ready to listen. The first snow fell quietly over Boothbay Harbor. It came not with bluster or drama, but with a hush that coated the world in softness. The ocean, usually restless, lay still like a sleeping animal beneath a white sky. From the lantern room at the top of Ashford Haven, Sam watched the flakes drift down, settling on the glass, with the patience of memory. The beams circled slow and steady, sweeping across the cold sea, like a steady hand brushing away time. It had been 1 year. A year since Evelyn's body washed ashore. A year since they pulled her name out of silence. A year since Sam had walked into the deep and come back changed. Now the lighthouse stood not as a beacon for ships, but as a monument to truth, to the kinds of truths that live in shadows, buried beneath years and guilt and fear. Not the kind of truth you shout, but the kind you carry, the kind that changes you without asking permission. Downstairs, the final panel had just been installed in the private exhibit. Clara stood beside it, dusting off the frame. She wore a wool coat, mittens too big for her hands, and a tired smile that meant more than any words. The new plaque read, "Evelyn Ashford, 1835 to 1854. She held what others feared. She bore what others could not. And still she chose love over vengeance, silence over spectacle. Her story was not one of death, but of protection. She did not haunt the sea. She calmed it." Clara stepped back, letting the words breathe. Sam came down the stairs behind her, hands in his coat pockets. "It's beautiful," he said. "She deserves beautiful," Clara replied, eyes still on the plaque. They walked through the small museum in silence, photos, sketches, sonar maps, deliberately cropped, and finally the medallion, still behind glass, still unchanged. A soft light glowed inside the case, not from any bulb or trick of design, but from something else. Something warm, gentle, forgiving. Sam placed his hand on the glass, not to test it, just to feel close. "She doesn't need protecting anymore," Clara said softly. "But the story does." Sam nodded. "And we'll keep telling it the right way." They left the lighthouse and walked the cliff trail, boots crunching in the light dusting of snow. The path curved along the edge where sea met stone, and far below the tide was calm and predictable. Winter was setting in, but it wasn't bitter. It felt clean. Halfway along the trail, they paused at the overlook, a wooden bench carved with the words, "For those who carry what cannot be seen." Sam sat eyes out to the water. You ever wonder why she chose not to speak louder, why she didn't try to be heard sooner? Clara didn't sit. She stood behind him, arms crossed against the wind. "I think she was waiting for the world to be ready," she said. "Or maybe just one person." Sam nodded. Maybe it was always meant to be him. Not because he was special, but because he was listening. That's what this whole thing had taught him. The ocean didn't just hide wrecks. It hid stories, people, regrets. And sometimes, if you were willing to be quiet long enough, it told them back to you, not in words, but in feelings, in echoes, in the way certain waves made you pause without knowing why. He thought back to the first time he saw Evelyn, on the beach. Soaked, broken, and yet intact. People said it was impossible that the ocean couldn't preserve a body like that after so many years. But maybe the ocean hadn't preserved her. Maybe it had guarded her. There was a difference. The next morning, Sam received a letter in the mail. No return address. Just a single sheet of thick paper folded neatly with handwriting that looked like it had been dipped in something ancient. It read, "There are others." Evelyn was not the only one to bear a burden not meant for this world. The sea holds many secrets, but so do the forests, the deserts, the sky. When you're ready, really ready, you'll know where to look. Sam read the note twice, then folded it, placed it in a drawer, and said nothing to anyone. Not yet. Later that afternoon, Clara found him in the workshop behind his house. He was carving again, not a statue this time, but a series of small wooden boxes, each shaped like a chest, each with a unique symbol on the lid. She picked one up. "What are these?" Sam looked up, dust in his hair, sawdust clinging to his sweater. "Places to hold stories," he said. She smiled. "You really are becoming one of them. One of who? The ones who keep watch." Sam didn't laugh, didn't deny it. He just kept carving. Because the truth was, he wasn't afraid of the sea anymore. He understood it now. Its depth, its moods, its memory. He knew that sometimes the deepest wounds weren't left on the body, but on the world itself, imprints of pain and sacrifice that didn't heal so much as settle. And that every so often, if the wind was right, and the silence respectful, those wounds would offer their stories back to you. Not for you to fix, but to remember. That was the difference between horror and history, between myth and meaning, between ghosts and guardians. By spring, the lighthouse would no longer be a lighthouse. It would become a sanctuary, not religious, not institutional, just sacred in a quieter way. A place for those who had lost something they couldn't name, who carried grief like a second heartbeat, who didn't need answers, only the reminder that their silence was shared. On the first day of March, Sam stood on the beach once more. The water was colder now, but he didn't flinch. He stepped in up to his knees, looked out at the endless blue, and whispered her name one last time. Evelyn. A gull cried overhead. A wave rolled in, gently touched his shins, and receded. No voice replied, but he didn't need one. She was gone, but never lost, and neither was he. That was the gift of this journey, not the mystery, not the discovery, but the understanding. That sometimes when the sea gives something back, it's not for the world. It's for you. So you can remember that silence isn't the absence of truth. It's the waiting place for those brave enough to speak it. And once you do, the sea listens.